Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Dr. Arshad and today I will be presenting the critical appraisal of an article titled Adverse Childhood Experience and Related Outcomes Among Adults Experiencing Homelessness, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis under supervision of Professor Dr. Saira Afzal. For this critical appraisal, I would be using two checklists. That is a PRISMA checklist for critical appraisal of systematic review with observational studies. This is the checklist. And the second will be the MOOS checklist for the meta-analysis of review with the observational studies. This is the checklist. Now coming to the summary of an article. The summary of the article says that author aimed to evaluate the lifetime prevalence of ACE and their association with health-related and functioning-related outcomes among homeless adults. They searched databases from original peer-reviewed and articles in English language were documenting the lifetime prevalence of ACE and association between health-related and function-related outcomes were included. They calculated the pooled prevalences, lifetime prevalence for one or more ACE and four or more ACE. And the leave out method was used for sensitivity analysis and studied meta regression to explore the potential moderators. 29 studies were selected, and the results showed that most of the studies were from USA, UK, and Canada and were predominantly the males. The mean age was 18 to 58 years. Lifetime prevalence for one or more race was extremely high, 89.8% for the homeless, and for the lifetime prevalence for four and more race was 53.9. The narrative synthesis of ACE was for the meta-analysis was done and consistently positively associated with high suicidality, suicide attempt, major depressive disorders, and substance abuse. And the funding was given by the Canadian Institute of Health Research and registered on Prosper. So the introduction of this article was starting with the scientific background of adverse childhood experiences and then the association between homeless and health shown a bidirectional relation. It was systematically reviewing the scientific literature also presents an opportunity to improve the quality of ACE studies in homeless population and and identify areas of standardization in field. This was the implication of the study. And the rationale was also given that the ACE has a bidirectional relationship and the homelessness is a risk factor for poor health and mental health and substance use. And as such, the authors sought to estimate the lifetime prevalence, evaluate study, sample characteristics, and review associations between ACE and health functioning of the homeless. Four inclusion criteria were used. First was the individuals that were experiencing experiencing the homelessness. Second was the age, that is at least 18 years to the and above. Were included studies that have cumulative ACE was the third criterion. Finally, the lifetime prevalence and association between must be present. All included in the systematic review and meta-analysis were only retrospective and cross-sectional studies. Also, an exclusion criteria was given, that was the reports in other than English language were excluded, and the systematic reviews and meta-analysis from the other data sources were also excluded. This was the whole of the flow sheet that was showing the criteria. So it was a search strategy using Medline, Embase, and Psychinfo. Two independent members were screening the articles for full text titles and abstracts, and any disagreement between the two members was disclosed. Data analysis, customized Microsoft Excel and other softwares were used. Variables that were assessed were country of the study, year of data collection, site of recruitment, sample size, age, gender, breakdown, ACE measurement tools, lifetime prevalences and outcomes, and other outcomes like health-related effects and the other health-related effects. Author used random fact model to calculate the pooled estimates. Heterogeneity was calculated by I2 statistics, and the funnel plots were given, and the Agar test was done for the visual evaluations of small study effects for the publication bias. And p-values of less than 0.05 was significant evidence for this publication bias. Results showed that the studies that were included collected data from this 1989 to 2018. Sample size was 25 to 2 to 41 people, and the countries that were identified were UK, US, and Canada. and quality of the studies was generally moderate, and most studies providing adequate demographic descriptions. These were the cases that were reported in the studies, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, verbal, and this whole table categories of adverse childhood experiences that were measured in the included study. 20 studies showed this number of participants and were included in the meta-analysis of one or more race, but it was only a narrative review because of the insufficiency of the outcome variables, and all the studies were not uniformly presenting the same outcome measure, so it was a narrative review. 15 to 52 participants were included in meta-analysis of 4 or more races. The overall pooled estimate for one or more race, as I've already mentioned, was extremely high, that 89.8, and the overall pooled estimate for 4 and more races was 53.9. These were the forest plots showing the contribution from all the studies and showing the pool prevalence. This was from the 4 and more ACEs. So a univariable analysis, none of the potential moderators were significantly associated, but multivariate meta-regression shows that studies that use the tool CD, case or AC scale that use 10 ACEs was showed reported higher prevalences. And homeless adults age 30 were reported lower ACEs than the homeless of age less than 30. These were the outcome variables that were identified after the narrative review of the included studies. It was suicidality that was shown in 5 studies associated with high suicide risk, and 4 or more races were associated with high suicide risk and suicide attempt. So similarly, it was mental health, alcohol, physical health, and other outcomes. This was the funnel plot that was showed for the potential bias, and the funnel plot is showed the asymmetry based on the visual inspection, and the result of video test also confirms the statistical probability of the publication bias in one or more ACE exposure. But for 4 or more ACE exposure, the funnel plot shows does not show any asymmetry, and the results of AGA test also confirms this evidence for the publication bias. Discussion was given with a scientific background, and most A studies for this systematic was done in Canada and US, and it also gives the limitation of the studies, the further implications of policies, and one possible explanation is that the criminal justice involvement and ACE are the risk factors for homelessness, and interventions to promote resilience and social reform must be needed. So few limitations were also given in the study, like all studies in the systematic meta-analysis were retrospective and cross-sectional, not possible to ascertain a temporal order of homelessness. And second, the study exclude these abstracts and studies that are not available in English, and these exclusion might have contributed to absence of included studies outside North America and UK. And considerable heterogeneity was that A scales were different A scales were used, and but all one study included the ascertained A's by use of retrospective and self-reported data, and there was a potential selection bias given that only 4 included studies used random and whole population sampling approaches. So this was the conclusion, showing that the complex relation between A's, homeless, and social disadvantages necessitates efforts to address the upstream and structural determinants of health. Now coming to the systematic review so for the critical appraisal by the PRISMA checklist. This is the PRISMA checklist 2020. As for the title, it is identified the report as the systematic review. Yes, it was identified. The abstract, yes, it was given. It was a structured abstract starting with the background, but no clear statement for the objective was given. Then the results were detailed, the conclusion was given, the implication, the source of funding, and the registration were also given in the abstract. The rationale was given in review of the existing knowledge. Yes, it was given, but the objective was not clearly mentioned. For the eligibility criteria, inclusion and exclusion criteria were given. Inclusion criteria was strong, but the exclusion criteria was not deeply explained. Information sources, yes, all the registered registries or databases used, like like Medline, etc., were used. Yes, they were mentioned. Search strategy in the form of were databases, registries, websites, filters, limits. Yes, it was given. Selection process, and the study met the inclusion criteria in the form of flowchart was also given. Data collection procedures specify the methods used for data collection reports, how many reviewers collected the data, worked independently. That was also mentioned. Data items like list and defined all outcomes for data was sought, specify whether all results were in the domain they were sought, and if not, then decide which result to collect. That it was also mentioned. List and define all variables for which data was sought, like funding source and etc. Yes, it was mentioned. Study of risk of bias included studies. It was reported, but the methods to control the bias were not mentioned. Effect measures specify the outcomes of the effect ratio used in the synthesis of results. Yes, it was mentioned. When coming to the methods, eligible synthesis studies, yes, it was mentioned. Describe methods required to prepare the data preparations, handling missing data. It was mentioned, but no method how to control this, how to they have handled this missing data was not given. Describe any methods to tabulate visually display results. Yes, it was given in the form of tables and graphs and figures. Describe any methods to use synthesized results of rationale of if meta-analysis was performed. Describe models, methods, identify the statistical extent of statistical and software. Yes, meta regression was used and statistical heterogeneity was also checked. Describe any methods used to explore cause of heterogeneity, like subgroup analysis. Yes, it was given. One thing that was missing was the methods used to assess the risk of bias for the missing synthesis. I've already told, and this was not applicable in this case. Study selection. Describe the results of search from the number of records identified in the studies in the form of flow diagram. Yes, it was given. Cited studies might appear to meet inclusion criteria, but which were excluded explained. Inclusion criteria was explained, but exclusion criteria was not very well explained. Cite each study and characteristics. A table was separately given for the study characteristics, and they were also cited. Risk of bias assessment not given. Results for the individual studies like outcomes and the summary statistics. Yes, it was given. Results of synthesis, it was given in the form of tabular forms. Present results, investigation of possible heterogeneity. Yes, it was given. Also, reporting bias, present assessment of risk due to missing data for arising from the reporting bias. Actually, it is no. So this is a correction here. So this in the discussion, general interpretation of results was given, limitations were given, and discuss implication of result policy. Yes, it was also given. Registration for the protocol was done, and support was from the funders, and declare any interest of review from the authors. And this last one was not applicable, and there was also not mention of any ethical approval from some board or some institute. Now coming to the Moose checklist. So for the Moose checklist, the problem definition, yes, it was defined that the lifetime prevalence in some countries is high. So it was taken as the hypothesis statement as well that homelessness causes the high lifetime prevalence among the adults suffering from homelessness. Description of study outcomes, yes, it was given. Types of exposures and intervention used, yes. Study design used, yes, it was given. And study population, the total number of participants were mentioned from the studies that were selected. Qualification of search, like librarian investigator, yes, it was mentioned. Search strategy included time period of synthesis and keywords. Yes, the time period was also given. Efforts to include all available studies, including contacts with authors. This was mentioned, but this second part was not clearly mentioned. Database and registry search, yes, they were given. Search software use, names, version, inclusion of all the softwares, yes, they were given. Use of hand searching, a reference list of obtained, a reference list is also given at the end. Method of addressing articles published in language other than English language, this was not applicable as these were excluded. Methods of having abstracts, yes, that were given, but unpublished studies was not mentioned. Description of any contact with authors, it was mentioned that two separate authors were reviewers, but as such, no description from the authors was mentioned. Description of relevance or appropriateness of studies assembled for assessing the hypothesis to be tested. it was given. Rationale of the selection, yes, it was given, but the rationale was a bit vague. Not vague, but it was given, but a little bit, it could have been improved with a good eligibility selection inclusion criteria. Documentation of how data were classified and coded. Actually, no matter, it is only mentioned that the meta regression was used, heterogeneity was assessed, and description of statistical methods that was not no random effect model was used for that was mentioned, but overall they did the review of the articles, and because of the unavailability of the or very few studies that were provided, and provision of appropriate tables and graphics. Actually, the narrative review was done for the association between the ACE and the health related outcomes. Other than that, these sections of the meta analysis were given. And graphically represented, yes. Tables of descriptive information, yes. Results of sensitivity, yes, it was given. And indication of statistical uncertainty of findings were also given. So, coming to the summary of the critical appraisal, the strengths were that the title was precise and mention of the study design, rationale of the study was good, inclusion criteria was in detail and added to the value, statistical analysis was strong, all the primary variables and outcomes were explained in detail, good graphical representation of results, conflict of interest was mentioned, separate checklist for systematic review and meta-analysis was given, which increased the strength of the study. Publication bias has been addressed. Quality assessment of the studies has been done, however, it was moderate. Some of the limitations that were identified by this critical appraisal, a clear statement of objective is not given in the abstract. Exclusion criteria is mentioned, however, it excludes the reports in languages other than English language. That restricted the overall results of publication mainly from the North America, America, and UK, and could have taken the results toward extremely high pooled prevalence of homelessness. Only the observational studies were included in the review that questions the generalizability of the results. Less number of studies were included in meta-analysis. Some of the studies had some missing variables. So a narrative review had to be done. Missing data is for the association of A's and the selected outcome variables. Missing data is mentioned, but no method to handle the data is mentioned. Ethical equivalent from any board is not mentioned. And a narrative review was done instead of meta-analysis for association of A's and health-related effects. So this was all from my side. Thank you. This is the YouTube link from where you can easily see the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amar. Very nice presentation. And this topic of childhood adverse experiences, it is